Stories for Simon, written by Lisa Miranda Zarzen and illustrated by Lauren Briggs. On the 13th of February 2008, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd moved a motion of apology to Australia's Indigenous peoples on behalf of the Australian Government in the House of Representatives. This is remembering our First Nations people. We are sorry. Stories for Simon. Simon lived with his family in a little house in a big city near a famous beach. Simon's favourite hobby was to collect things like shells, leaves and tiny fossils. His uncle had sent him something for a new collection, a beautifully painted boomerang wrapped in an old newspaper. Simon took the boomerang to school for show and tell. "Ah," said the class as he unwrapped it for them to see. But it was the newspaper that caught the teacher's eyes. Miss Adams asked Simon to hold it up. He smoothed out the crumpled paper and saw these words: "For the pain, suffering and hurt, we say sorry." There was a long silence as the class looked at the big word, sorry. Miss Adams said, "This newspaper is from a very important day when our Prime Minister said sorry to the stolen generation." Questions crowded the classroom. "What are we sorry for?" the children asked. "For a hurt that happened a long time ago but still hasn't healed," said Miss Adams. "Who are the stolen generations?" they all wanted to know. The stolen generations are the Indigenous children of this country, the descendants of the very first Australians who were taken away from their mums and dads, explained Miss Adams. "It wasn't because they did anything wrong, and some of them still haven't found their way home." The bell rang for the end of the school day. Suddenly Simon could hardly wait to go home and see his family. At bedtime, Simon gave his mum an especially big cuddle and told her about his day. "How long do we have to be sorry for?" he asked. "We'll always be sorry, Simon. Not so that we feel sad or guilty, but to always remember the bad things that happened and make sure that they never happen again. That way the future will be bright as you can imagine it." As Simon looked out into the night sky, he couldn't stop thinking about the big sorry word. He saw it sparkling between the moon and 1,000 twinkling stars. That night, Simon dreamt that the sorry word turned into a sorry cloud, and then it started raining. But instead of big, soft, salty raindrops, it was raining big, hard stones, and on every stone, the word sorry. The sorry storm went on all night. In the morning, Simon awoke to a surprise. His room was filled with the stones he had dreamt about. They were everywhere, like a brand new collection. Simon tried to think of a place big enough for all these stones. "I know," he thought, and packed them into a wagon. Simon arrived at the famous beach near his house. Another boy looked at the wagon curiously. "Hi, I'm Vic. What are you doing?" he asked. Simon told Vic about his dream. "I'm going to throw the stones into the ocean," he said. He was proud that he had thought of a place deep and wide enough for all the stones. But Vic didn't like that idea. "Maybe you've been given the stones for a reason, and if you throw the stones away, you'll never know why. I reckon my Nan would know what to do. We can see her if you like." "Okay," said Simon with a wide smile. "What do I call your Nan?" "Call her Auntie," said Vic. "It's a sign of respect we give to our elders." Somewhere between the famous beach and Auntie Betty's door, the two boys became friends. Auntie Betty lived in a warm house in a narrow street near a beautiful bay. She welcomed the boys with a big smile and huge hugs. The boys told Auntie Betty the whole story while she took a good look at the stones. You certainly have a lot of stones there," she said at last. "And in this house we have a lot of stories. How about we swap the sorry stones for some of the stories?" Oh, Simon loved stories. He couldn't believe that Auntie Betty had so many stories that she could trade for all his stones. "But remember," said Auntie Betty, leaning in closer, "you must listen carefully to these stories. They are precious and important." Simon and Vic nodded. And then Auntie Betty began. She was a very good storyteller. Auntie Betty's first story was about the beginning of time and the creation of all things. She told stories about animals and people and the land and the sea, the sky and the rain. Simon loved them all. Slowly but surely, Simon parted with the sorry stones and gained in return a magnificent collection of stories. As Simon cradled the very last stone, Auntie Betty told the last story. "This story," said Auntie Betty, "is about me. It's what happened to me when I was a little girl." I lived in a big happy family with lots of brothers and sisters. One day a man called an Aboriginal protection officer took me from my family. My brothers and sisters were also taken away, but to different places. We were scattered. Our family was shattered. I went to live far away. For a long time my mum didn't get to make me breakfast or kiss me goodnight. Auntie Betty told of a family's love disrupted and letters written but intercepted. She explained how pride, security, identity and family were stolen away as she went from orphanage to foster home and back. All she had was a loneliness and fear. Auntie Betty had lost more than anyone could ever give back to her, and she lived with that always. When Auntie Betty was all grown up, the welfare authority told her where her mother was living. Auntie Betty finally got to see her again. Her mother told her how every day she had tried to find Auntie Betty. They hugged and cried tears of pain and joy, all mixed together. As Simon gave Auntie Betty the last stone, he remembered the big sorry word from the newspaper. Under his breath he whispered, "Sorry, Auntie Betty." "You know what that sorry word means, Simon?" she asked. Simon shook his head. "Yes, it means the start of healing for so many people. The journey has just begun." As the boys walked off together, Simon promised to show Vic all his precious collections, and Vic said he'd teach Simon to throw a boomerang. That night, as Simon's mum hugged him goodnight, he thought about all the hugs that Auntie Betty and her mum had lost. He wondered how you ever make up for that. Finally he fell asleep. Once more Simon had a dream. He dreamt that Auntie Betty took a wagon full of stones to a place where the land touched the sea. One by one she threw them into the night. One by one the dark heavy stones turned into stars and filled the sky. The story of Simon.